Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Overwatch Lately. I'm Chris Boopasaurus here with one of my good friends. I'm so excited to have you on. It is going to be Christian Heurix. Tom, sir, how's it going?
Good, man. Good to have the full name represented as well. The CT, we were talking about this a little bit before, but the CT, believe it or not, doesn't stand for Connecticut. It just doesn't. Kenobi's the only one that's actually from Connecticut. I'm not. That's just my initials, man.
All right, for all two people who understand that joke, you're welcome, and welcome back to Overwatch Lately, where we talk about everything that's been going on in Overwatch lately. And, you know, it's been pretty nice. Last week, huge news week with all the talent departures. We'll kind of touch on that and the transitions that Overwatch League is going through. But this week, it's a little bit better. We got a new patch. We got some announcements that might have been a little bit forced as Custo goes to Tom Holland School of Keeping Secrets. And we've got some really good news, more patch notes, more dev diaries. Overall, are you feeling pretty good about this current week of Overwatch?
I actually am. I mean, especially as of like an hour ago, maybe even less than that at this stage. I mean, they just dropped the patch notes on us that recently. So I'm really excited. I definitely like the direction that we're going in, especially given a lot more involvement from the devs in terms of just like talking to us and giving us a little bit of insight. I definitely like that kind of thing for sure.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Any type of communication is always going to be better rather than having us try to come up with ways of making excuses for things. And actually, we have concrete proof of how they're thinking and their intention going into a lot of these design choices. But we'll talk about all of that. But first, I think one of the biggest pieces of news was it dropped earlier today by Custa on accident. And this happens, right? If you wear glasses and you're on Twitch, you can see the things in your glasses. If you're sharing your screen, we can see what's on your screen. So anything that's not safe for work or anything that's personal, you should kind of decide where that's going to show up. But today, Custa leaked an email that leaked two more members of the Overwatch League team. That's going to be Jaws of the Jaws and the Leg Day casting group in Contenders, and also Reinforce is going to be back. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I actually really like that Reinforce is back. I think that, not having him in season 2, certainly I would have personally liked to see him. Obviously, decisions get made and there are reasons for those decisions. I understand all that kind of thing. But I think something that the desk that I really like, and I think a lot of people like me really enjoy, is having someone that, really has that experience of being able to dive into, why a certain play was good, why a certain play may not have been good. And I think Reinforce brings a lot to that. And I think he's also had a lot of experience now, especially with being able to actually be entertaining and doing so as well. So I really like Reinforce being back on. A little unfortunate that he didn't get to announce himself. That sucks. But we've had a couple of these, spurred up a little bit here and there where
maybe
things
it's just how we get news now.
I guess Owl Leaks now is just the way that we're just going to get transferred information at this stage. But, Jaws getting brought up, that wasn't really a surprise to me either. I think it's a little bit more of a surprise that Leg Day wasn't brought up as well. But again, you have to take what you can get. And, opportunities come. Those slots need to get filled. There was a play-by-play slot. Guess what? Jaws gets moved up. That's just how it is. But, obviously Jaws definitely earned it, in my opinion.
I think everyone will agree. A lot of people, didn't see any negative thing at all, even on r/competitive Overwatch about this decision. The only negative thing I saw was people were upset that they're one of the longest serving casting duos, especially in Tier 2 Overwatch, is going to be split up. I'm not going to be the only one, #leaks. But the other thing that we need to talk about, too, is what this means for Overwatch, right? So when you have broadcasters leaking and stuff, it can be intentional. It can be a really good way to kind of drum up hype, right? Some people do this on purpose. Companies have been known to kind of leak information. Horror movies are really well known of kind of like leaking out trailers just real quick to kind of drive some interest. But this has gone a little too far, especially according to some members of the Overwatch community, some former members of the Overwatch community. You've got Flame talking about safety. You've got Monty reiterating his point about the unprofessionalism of this. And this is Custa, /PlatChat's kind of third strike at this point in time. What do you think should happen from here on out? Do you care that Custa is leaking this stuff? Is an announcement that important? Or is this something that needs to kind of be nipped in the bud?
Yeah, I mean, an announcement is huge. Being able to basically control that kind of thing is absolutely paramount, in my opinion. And I think certainly a lot of people in the Overwatch League feel very similarly behind the scenes that, first of all, this was absolutely, without a doubt, not intentional. They did not do this on purpose. This was, in my mind, completely accidental. That's unfortunate. And certainly it takes a little bit away from what people like Reinforce and perhaps even Jaws to a degree. I mean, Jaws announced today. So we're able to get with their announcements. You want to be able to control that. You want to be able to put that on your own socials. You want to be able to drum up most of that and direct it directly at your brand specifically. So to be able to, have some of that taken away, that definitely sucks. And I feel for them. That's never really happened to me before. Obviously, that's a much larger stage over there at Overwatch League for that to kind of be happening. So I don't personally know what that feels like. I imagine it sucks, though. I don't know if there's necessarily any repercussions that need to be made. I don't deal with all that. If I was gonna be someone that was behind the scenes, I imagine something would happen. I just don't know what that is. I don't have the experience there.
I mean, so for some reason, I don't care, right? I would love for Reinforce and Jaws to have the ability to announce themselves. So let me tell you a little quick story. So I used to be a preschool teacher, and so a lot of people got preggers while, their first kid goes through. There needs to be some context around that sentence. But what happens a lot of times is they'll get pregnant for a second time as their older child goes through the preschool. And one of these days, a parent told me that they were expecting, and I didn't know there was a rule, like you had to wait a certain amount of time. So I sent an email to our entire class, like, this person's pregnant. And they hadn't said anything yet. And I felt awful, right? It was like, you only get to do this every once in a while in your life, right? How many more times is that person going to be pregnant? Maybe
it's such
11.
A big announcement too. I mean, when you look at someone like Jaws, I mean, he's been in tier 2 for what, 2 years now? I think he started in 2018 season 1 when they brought him in for EU. So this is 2 years that he's been working up to this moment, and to have at least some of that thunder stolen away from him. And it's, you even look at Reinforced to have some of that thunder. You're talking about someone that's been talked about of, why is he not on the desk? Why has he been taken off of that role? Can we put him back? That kind of thing. It's been talked about through the entirety of season 2 and pre-season 2 as well. And now going into season 3, I'm sure it was going to be a question again anyways, especially given some of those departures from the talent lineup as well. But to not be able to do that yourself, that sucks. That does suck.
Yeah, it kind of takes all that empowerment, all that excitement, right? A lot of people behind the scenes knew about these changes, but it's kind of like, you might know, but if you say something, it's like one of those things where you kind of take their power away, right? And I agree with you, man. It's definitely unfortunate that they can't announce their pregnancy or announce their time in Overwatch League themselves on their own time. Doesn't look like Hex was really planning on anything, as his tweet was, "I am returning to Overwatch League." That's the tweet. Gotta love that brand. And I'm actually really excited to see Hex and Jaws cast together, because I actually think they both can really play off of each other. Hex can be a little bit of a curmudgeon, and I think Jaws could play off of that a little bit. What do you expect from this duo?
I'm not sure exactly. I mean, obviously they come in with their individual styles. I mean, we've seen Hex now with really, really prolific casters, starting with ZP, then he worked with Similar. So that now kind of introducing Jaws into the mix as well. Obviously, I have a little bit more of an idea of, Jaws as a caster, because we're both casting tier 2. I mean, same thing with you, especially with you as a play-by-play. I imagine you've watched his cast quite a lot. So I think he's definitely a different style as compared to ZP and Similar. So that'll be interesting for Hex to kind of get used to. That's the biggest thing that I don't think people realize, that it's actually such a big deal to start over with a new casting partner. Like, getting a new duo and understanding how, you want to work with this person, it takes a while. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. And to be able to be seamless, it's a lot. It's very difficult. So I think it's going to take them some time, and people need to be kind of aware of that. But overall, I think they'll get there. And I think that, especially Similar and Hex's performance throughout season 2, where, we saw a tremendous amount of progress to the point where I thought they were actually very solid in season 2, especially. I think Jaws and Hex can get there, and it won't take nearly as long. I mean, obviously Jaws coming in with a lot of experience. I think they'll do well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm really interested to see what kind of dynamic they're going to have with each other, because each pair kind of has something that you can bite off of, right? What is the defining aspect of the pairs that are remaining? For UberX, it's that hype, it's that knowledge. For Jaws and Hex, they're going to have to go through the process of learning about each other, right? And it's really interesting to me, because Hex is almost a decade older, I think, than Jaws too. So I'm really interested to see how that's going to play with each other as well, because I know when I'm talking to people 10 years younger than me, I feel like I'm going to die in like 6 months, right? That's how old that I feel. But we'll see how those two come together. I know, right? And so you can even play off of that, right? If you got the old curmudgeon guy and the young whippersnapper coming together, hire me. I can help you with your branding any day. But Heurix, I'm really excited for this. But let's go ahead and move on to some things that Jeff has said about the potential impact of some decisions and some rumors that have been going around about Overwatch League. So this all started when Among did a little bit of a tease, and the rumors kind of flew everywhere that it was hero bans. I still don't know where hero bans really came out, but all of a sudden on Reddit, on Twitter, everything was talking about hero bans, and it got so ubiquitous around the social medias of Overwatch that Jeff actually had to step in and talk about why they wouldn't work in Overwatch League, and it's not going to be in Stage 1. It's something that they're always willing to look at, but I'm sure you read through Jeff's thoughts. Are you happy with his explanation? Because I think it shows a lot of design aspects that they're thinking about, as well as the fact that they're talking to us more. I love it. I'm glad he didn't have us stay on this until we had an answer. He nipped this in the bud, and this is the exact kind of progress that we want. But did you like his answer?
Yeah, I absolutely loved it, actually. I mean, I was someone that was kind of on the fence, and I'm usually on the fence about a lot of things like this when they introduce these kinds of options, especially when they're so polarizing. I think that I very much sit on the fence. I try to, see both sides, and I sit there and I say, you know what? Let's at least take a look at it, or maybe let's kind of sit down and really kind of pace ourselves a little bit before we make too many gut reactions, or knee-jerk reactions rather. Especially given, my history as a person. Before I got into Overwatch, I was working on a different game, and I had a lot more conversations with the developers of that game. So I had a little bit more insight into what was going on. And I certainly liked that aspect. And that's something that I felt like I was missing, maybe not on a personal level from Overwatch. Obviously, I don't think very many people expect that, but now seeing Jeff come through and giving his thoughts on things, like seeing the introduction of that kind of concept of the 132, now the hero bans talked about as well. I certainly like that they're being more upfront about their thought processes. So I do appreciate that. On the hero ban issue specifically, though, I don't know. I don't think that would have been the go-to answer. I'm more leaning towards the side of, allow things to be played, but certainly create alternatives to where we could see other metas come out. And I think definitely a good direction that they took that they took now was certainly, some more frequent hero updates, some balance changes that we've already seen come through. I mean, literally today. So as long as they can kind of keep on a more brisk schedule, I'll be happy, and we can leave the hero bans out of it.
Dude, I was like, oh, what is this? Is it Christmas time? A second PTR patch in a month? That's like amazing, right? Because what are the complaints that we've had about this development team? Non-responsive, too slow to actually respond. And when they do make changes, they're not actually making changes big enough to affect anything. And with these patches, they're going to be able to get involved a little bit more quickly. And this should be live by the second stage of Overwatch League. So we're going to see what's on the PTR soon. And what's currently on the PTR is going to be what's live in Overwatch League. And even then, a lot of the players are like, this is already on the right direction. Even though you can still play Orisa, you can still play Sigma, it's not the end-all be-all anymore, especially with D.Va coming right back in the middle. I know she's one of your favorite characters, Heurix. And so let's talk a little bit more about design too, because something that you've always impressed me with is you have a really big brain when it comes to how things interact with each other. And I think that's why you're such a great analyst when it comes to your casting. So when you look at the game in its current state, and when you're even looking at the PTR patch, what is something that you're really excited about, but also something that you're kind of like, hey, let's kind of move into this direction a little bit more, maybe after finding some more details?
Yeah, I mean, there are two main things that I'm certainly curious about going into this. I would think that the first thing that everybody should be immediately thinking about should be, first of all, the Rhine Brawl. This is something that if you've been following the Tier 2 scene, even parts of the Tier 1 scene that have been a little bit more forthright with information, talking about the Reinhardt Brawl compositions has definitely been out there. It's been discussed over the last few weeks especially, but it has been a composition that, based around Reinhardt and Orisa as the two main tanks, teams have definitely played with a lot over the last month or two, and even sometimes before that. So that would be a thing that I would be thinking about if I was a player right now, thinking about playing competitively, or even someone just on the ladder, that the Reinhardt-based brawl compositions are incredibly strong right now, to the point where now with these nerfs to Orisa and Sigma, I would imagine that a lot of the compositions will be based around that right there, unless the map is far more open and far more vertical, in which case you could see the dive. But hey, guess what? That's where we saw that McCree thing come in, and he's basically a tank now. So these anti-dive compositions are going to be really solid too. So those are the two main points of curiosity I think I have is, dive versus the anti-dive, especially with McCree, and the Rhine-based brawl compositions that I think are going to be very, very interesting to kind of watch and play out, certainly over the course of Contenders and even into Overwatch League. I think this patch is going into Overwatch League, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know though. I don't think they specifically said.
There's some semantics involved. Technically, these are both patch 1.44, but this should be in by what I've seen, the most reputable source I saw. This could be wrong, but the person that I'm trusting on this one said that it's going to be in stage 2. So it's going to move. Move along. The first stage of Overwatch League is going to be what's currently on the PTR, and then once they're able to move onto a next patch, it'll be what's going to be moving on to live, and then what's currently on the patch notes that you're seeing. So that's going to be really awesome, because what I'm really excited about, and some people don't think about this, is how many people do you think were forced into retirement because of these slow patches, because there was no Reinhardt or Winston for so long, right? They're going to be able to come back, these diva players, the Reinhardt players, the Clone Mans of the world, who I think needed to deserve their shot, right? But they just couldn't play the character they were best at. With these kind of more intuitive and more frequent patch changes, I think these players are going to be able to come back into the scene and potentially get another shot in the Overwatch League. I think that's something that's understated when it comes to esports and Overwatch specifically.
Yeah, I think that actually plays into more of the DPS side of things, actually, even more so than the tanks. I mean, certainly you have the tank specialists, and I can remember back in, what was it, 2017? Yeah, 2017, right before we were getting into Overwatch League for the first season, and talking to some of the players that I knew back then, talking about, this whole dynamic of specialists versus kind of starter players. How are you going to fit into the mold? And certainly I think a lot of that kind of specialist thing has fallen to the wayside outside of, star players that typically play, Widowmaker. Those specialists still exist, obviously. And then you have players like Emong as well that can play Wrecking Ball. Certainly he can play more than that. And we have seen other players like him kind of in that same mold. But I think this definitely plays more to the DPS side of things, where you're going to see a lot more players specializing, and they'll be utilizing those larger rosters that they kind of have to have now due to the travel schedules, to be able to kind of really specialize in and, say, okay, in this meta, we know we're going to be playing this pool of heroes. So we know that this player can be good at this player can be good at that. Against these teams that we're going to be playing this homestand, we might not need this character because we don't expect to play it. You know what? You can stay here, take a rest. We'll go out with this other roster, and we'll have you for that next homestand.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think you're right. When you're able to add diversity to your rosters, you're going to be better off overall, instead of having all of the weight land on a couple people, like Carpe for the Fusion last season, right? It was like, this guy needs to perform or else the team loses, right? And he had such a mute season. It was very average, especially for a guy that like Carpe. You could see the stress and the toll go on to him. But now that the ability of the devs to kind of come into these patches and be a little bit more aggressive with how they change the game, I think a lot of these players are going to find success again. And some of these up-and-coming Widow specialists like Zerocious, some of these hit scan players are going to be able to play McCree again. I mean, in this meta, Pine might have not retired. So we'll see what happens when it comes to where these McCree, where these hit scan players, as well as some of these Diva and Reinhardt players coming back.
You got Miro coming back. You got Miro coming back. So, I mean, that's your first. If you're going to sit here and die on this hill and say, you know what, this could really bring some people back, you've got Project Uno right there. If Miro does well, then that's easily an easy way to just be able to defend your point right there.
Exactly. And I'm really excited to see what new talent and old talent come right back. Heurix, is there anyone that you kind of want to see back? I know Pine is on the top of everyone's list, but we'll say that's a given. Is there anyone else that you're seeing in this patch that might be able to either get promoted or might move from a bench spot to a starting spot?
I don't know if anybody just jumps. I mean, certainly speaking, I mean, in terms of just retired players that I would love to see back, I would love to see people that I knew fairly well, although I think most of them are feeling just as successful in other areas of the industry. So I don't think that they will come back necessarily unless a very, very fruitful offer comes their way, which I just doubt. So that would be like at the forefront of my mind. As for players that could definitely step up and really stand out, I definitely think that from a contender's perspective, you're going to be seeing players that are already doing well continue to do well, because a lot of the players right now that are playing Widow are certainly going to do well in anti-dive with a Widow or a McCree. I mean, anybody that thinks of Widow or McCree right now and watches contenders at all probably is thinking of asking, which you absolutely should be. I think he'll continue to do well. I mean, Skyfoxes, they just beat Atlanta Academy, which is insane, with a 3-0. So I would think that players like that are definitely going to be making some moves pretty soon.
All right, well, I'm looking forward to see what names old and new will be coming back, but let's talk about some up-and-coming players in a negative light right now. So this is more of a philosophical point, right? And I kind of wanted to bring it up because, again, I like the way you think about these things, and I'm really intrigued by what you might say to this. So recently, and this is not the only time this has happened to an Overwatch player, in Tier 4 all the way to Tier 1, right, all the way into Overwatch League, where things that have been said a couple years ago come back and bite you. In the age of the internet, unfortunately, everything that you type in a Discord chat or on Twitter or on Facebook is saved forever, right? And now I think as kids say things when they're 14, 15 years old, as they turn 18, they start to realize, oh man, 60-year-old me could potentially lose me a job. Let me go ahead and think about this. But the question really is, all right, some of the stuff that this current player that we're talking about, Slur, said was egregious. It was awful. Right, but this happened to IO Stux a little while ago, and to a very, very extreme, a lot of people talk about Dreamcasper. Where does the line end, right? When does recovery, okay, that was me 2 years ago, it's okay for me to come back, begin and end? Because for me, for a guy like Dreamcasper, it involved minors, and like, I'm sorry, you're done, right? But for something like this, I think it's a little bit more nuanced. Where do you fall on it?
Well, I mean, there's an actual lawful defense that can be used that perfectly describes this. It's youthful indiscretion, where basically it says that because I was literally a child and I was an idiot, I've grown up now. It's okay. And I think that to a degree that definitely falls in line with this. I think everybody said something dumb in their life. I feel like, I mean, certainly lines get crossed further then maybe someone else may cross that line. I think everybody has, at least in some way or in some regard, said something dumb, but maybe not to that same extent. The unfortunate thing is that when you're in the limelight, that thing gets, pulled out into the limelight along with you. I think as long as things aren't too egregious, I definitely think that we should be able to all kind of collectively move past it, give them an opportunity for redemption. And I think that becomes part of their storyline. That becomes part of their narrative, that we all kind of care about, this person becoming more than what we once thought they were. I think Sinatra is a perfect example of that as well, where, perhaps at one time he was very much considered to be a toxic player, certainly talked some mad smack to people and stuff, especially in ladder. And now you look at this guy and he's now a pillar of the Overwatch League, a spokesperson, has been now on syndicated television, interviewed by some insanely large names like Jimmy Fallon. So to be putting him out into that, I think we've given him that opportunity for redemption, and he took it. So we should be able to extend that to this, a number of new players as well, if they're in a similar position. Again, though, there is a line, so let's make sure that line is not crossed. I definitely think that players have crossed that line, and rightfully so. They may or may not be out of the league at the moment, but as long as we know that there is a line, give them a chance for redemption and allow them that opportunity, because I think a lot of players will take that in stride and do a lot with it, like Sinatra again.
So I've got an interesting question for you. So when I graduated college, I was a music education major. They told us to go through our social media and delete anything with like an alcoholic beverage in our hand, with if someone in the background smoking a cigarette, or if we're at a party, right? I don't think they should go to that extreme. But do you think these players, if they're in any way related to an Overwatch League team or a contenders team, be told to, hey, guys, go back on your Twitters, delete this stuff before someone finds it? Is that something that they should be told? Is that something they should learn? Is that a 21st century skill?
I think so. I think it's tough to say, because as a fan, I would love to know who they are as a person, just everything about them. I think that's what people really dig into. And you can empathize more with a person when you actually know who they are. So as a fan, I would love to know who they are as a person and see what they're really like, whether it be that, maybe they drink, whatever, maybe they have some harsh opinions, whatever it may be. However, as someone that obviously knows a little bit more about the behind the scenes factors, especially in regards to sponsorships and things of that nature, branding is massive. And unfortunately, you cannot get away with as much when other brands are involved because money's tied to that. Other people are involved. Other, again, entities are involved. So I think that people need to understand that there's a lot more that goes into that than just knowing who that person is. And I would say, as much as it would be great that we could see who these individuals are fully, unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that you do have to be professional in this setting. You do kind of, in a way, have to set an example. And that's just how things are. And you have to kind of be used to that. You have to be okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it can be really hard as we get super philosophical about this, because at the same time, people are being rewarded for leaking information, right, and not doing that stuff. So you're getting proof from the other side that's like, okay, if I'm abrasive, if I'm like this, people are going to know me. Everyone likes a heel, right? Maybe I can kind of brand myself as this a person, but at the same time, on the other side, if I'm a parent and I'm seeing someone in the esports space and my kids thinking about it and I see that, I'm going to be really concerned, right? Are we just kind of in a place where this is a growing industry? No one really knows what to do. No one really knows how to represent themselves online. So what should the league be doing for a lot of these players in terms of getting them prepared for this PR, for this branding? Because without player branding, there is no Overwatch League, right? They need to sell jerseys. They need to sell equipment. They need to be able to transition. Oh, I like the San Francisco Shock. Oh, I like Energy. And so now Energy is going to get, swag, not just the Shock. And then after that, that can go into sponsorships with computers, right? So that kind of chain of consumerism isn't broken, but a player can definitely break that. What should the league be doing to make sure that these players understand, all right, it's a brand, you got to control yourselves? That might be outside of just regular social media training.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it necessarily is a league thing. I wonder if actually this should be a team-based thing. And certainly there's a lot of debate that could be had about, who should be in charge of that. But at least in my opinion, it really kind of comes down to the teams to make sure that they're able to, first of all, help their players and their branding processes. You look at other esports, and this is how things work. You don't pretty much ever have an entity like a development company, someone, making the game and really kind of sticking into how a player is showing themselves off. I think that's definitely, in my opinion, it's not necessarily their job to be kind of policing that. It's certainly, you look at some of the other esports organizations, they're really the ones doing that. I mean, I definitely know friends of mine that have been picked up for teams and for other games, especially. They have packages. They literally help you along and make sure that you understand how to kind of carry yourself on social media, on your streams, making sure you're not, doing anything like crazy, like leaking or, any behavioral things that may stick out that they don't want to stick out. And it really falls on the organization. I think the same should be happening here in Overwatch League, where you do see the organizations actually stepping up and taking charge of that. And I think in a lot of cases they really have. I think in a lot of cases they have done well with that as well. You look at some of the teams that have done well with a lot of their branding and a lot of their socials. They've done well to do that. I think Shock actually has done a great job as well in terms of being able to manage some of their players that, people thought one way of. And now they're being reintroduced, kind of like reborn, as something, I think, better for the public eye.
Great. I love it. And I hope that more teams are going to be able to do that, because you're totally right. We've seen transformations. We've seen these kids grow up right in front of our eyes into adults that can be brand ambassadors for the Overwatch League. And I got to say, if you're a tier 2 player, if you're a tier 3 player, you're wanting to get into any sort of business, if you're the one putting in the work to represent yourself in the best way, you're going to be ahead of the ones that aren't. So some other people might get lucky, but if you're the ones, putting in the work, sometimes it's all about, opportunity meets preparation, right? The opportunity comes and you're going to be prepared and you're going to be able to be a star because of it. But let's talk about future stars as we get another really great transition. Thank you to tier 2 Overwatch, because there's been a lot going on in tier 2 Overwatch you might not know. A lot of people might not know. We kind of referenced it a little earlier that there's been an entire 2 tournaments over the last couple of weeks, the seeding tournament and the play-in tournament, to figure out who's going to be in contenders proper, who's going to be in open division, and who's going to be in trials. So Tier 2 Overwatch has gone through a ton of stuff. I really, really, really am excited to see what the new season's going to be, because like you said, Atlanta Academy have already lost. Atlanta Academy, lost out in the losers bracket final. Envy's gone through undefeated. Can you give us a little bit of a summary of what's been going on, at least in the North American version of things? Because you were typing up some stats on your Twitter not too long ago, so you've got to be following it.
Yeah, I've definitely been following. I think the big standout for me right now has got to be Skyfoxes, and that's definitely one that I've been keeping up with stats wise. I mean, data wise, I've been following Skyfoxes quite a lot because they've been of interest to me. You look at their performance through the 2 Breaking Barriers tournaments, and then their performance in the Mayhem Winter Classic as well. This is a team that has been on the rise, but there were questions of whether or not they're going to be standing up to the juggernauts of NA that have existed over the past year. Which, of course, if you've been following the NA contenders scene over the last year and probably even a little bit longer. I mean, Atlanta Academy and Envy are the 2 teams to beat more often than not. And, well, they've actually been able to stomp out one of those teams. Atlanta Academy did actually get 3-0'd by Skyfoxes.
That's nuts. Not only did they lost, but they got swept. That's nuts. Especially given that Atlanta Academy, they won in a Game 5 set that was, in their words, one of the closest matches that they have ever played. Atlanta and Skyfoxes both said that on their individual Twitters, that it was so insanely close. Literally every map went down to the wire. And it's unfortunate that we did not get to see that. Certainly would have loved to, first of all, be able to experience it, but second of all, get some more data, because I've been collecting it. But it is what it is. And now we'll be able to get to see them, first of all, take on Second Wind, and then whoever wins that to be able to take on Envy later, who I think has really been kind of dominant. Envy definitely standing out as the number 1 and rightfully so seed. Their roster is insane, whether it be on paper or whatever. It's just absolutely bonkers. But I'll be curious, because Second Wind and Skyfoxes are 2, I guess you could say, I mean, they're signed players, don't get me wrong, but like they're not, non-academy, I guess is the best way to put it. And they have been pretty consistently strong. Second Wind has obviously had a really prolific history over the course of their time in contenders, but Skyfoxes has been in there, and there have been some times where Skyfoxes have done very well, and I think this is going to be a huge breakout season for Skyfoxes if they can maintain their roster. I think that's the biggest issue, is if they can maintain that roster throughout the entirety of contenders. I think they're going to lose some players. Well, it's a catch-22, right? It's a catch-22 when you're in Tier 2 Overwatch. You do too well, your players might not be there in a couple weeks, right? I'll never forget.
Second Wind has had that issue.
I mean, there was a season where they literally started with an entirely different roster, and then 4 weeks later, only one of those players was still on the team. That's absolutely nuts. There's so much. I mean, like, there's so much movement. There's such a lack of consistency when it comes to these Tier 2 teams that it's almost hard to kind of root for anybody, because you don't, you have the Envies, you have the Atlanta Academies, and those are attached to teams, and Envy's a well-known brand. Atlanta's done a very good job in terms of socials in a general. It's easy to root for them, but I don't know, can even some of the hardest Overwatch fans name 2 players on Skyfoxes, right? Can some of, if I were to ask a lot of people who watch a ton of Overwatch who the most likely players on Second Wind to be called up are going to be, I'm not sure that people are going to be able to have that answer. We got to give them that exposure, and we've had some really crazy games. Do you like the way that Blizzard's kind of been doing these earlier games? Let's kind of like be real. So basically, they're cutting the fat, right? They're cutting all those bad games that we had, admittedly, in contenders, because they were very uneven. While some of the groups could have been close, there were some bad games, some dirty games that I don't think showed NA contenders off very well. So I think the idea here is hey, let's just show the best games. Do you like the way that this is going so far, or do you wish that you had the opportunity to watch these casted as opposed to like breakable barriers on a stream?
I actually, it's one of those. It's again one of those things where it's like I see both sides of the coin. As someone who came up through Tier 3, Tier 2, where I'm at now, it definitely, it's unfortunate that I think that people are going to see that as a missed opportunity. However, I think it's far more important that we remove burnout, first of all, because, along with Overwatch League, you also had every region of contenders rolling at the same time, sometimes very often on the same days, even. So to kind of fit all that in and then expect a viewer to want to care about contenders when Overwatch League is happening simultaneously almost, it's very difficult. And I wouldn't want to ask anybody to do that. I wouldn't want to put any pressure on someone to basically care about everything all at once. And 60 hours a week, you better get started. It's tough to ask of anyone, even as someone that follows the scene as a literal job. It's a lot. It's a lot to follow. So to ask that of fans, I think is a little bit much. And I think it's a good direction that they decide, you know what, hey, let's go ahead and let's make this a situation where we can see the best of the best, so that people can really care about, what's at the forefront, which is Overwatch League, and then the top end of what's happening at contenders, what to look out for, what to expect. And I think a lot of people see that as well with like the NCAA, where you look at collegiate, and a lot more people are talking about the big games than they are of the little games. You're talking about Division I versus Division II and that kind of thing. I think that plays into the conversation here, and I think that going in this direction is very, very smart to avoid viewer burnout more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think it's a good idea to kind of lean into like you said, the NCAA, or even like the Australian Open's going on right now, those early matches where, you kind of know their names, you kind of just want to see what they look like or what country they're from, right? Come into play here, because I think one of the biggest things that Tier 2 really needs to have is consistency, right? But when you kind of lean into the amateurism of it, when you only broadcast the quarterfinals and above, that kind of planned, iPhones do this where they purposely don't put a lot of iPhones out there so they can jack the prices and people want to see them more often. I forget, there's a word for it, but basically what I think they're kind of doing the same thing. It's like, all right, even though there's going to be technically less contenders on screen, they're all playing through all those tournaments, right? You're going to see potentially the quarterfinals and above get casted, and the more often you appear in these, right, it's going to be way easier for that casual viewer to remember who you are, right? Because, the last time I watched contenders, this person was good. Looks like they're still in contenders, they're still good, maybe this guy needs to get brought up, as opposed to seeing everyone play every single week. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for players to really separate themselves, and really prove that they're the cream of the crop.
Yeah, I think also even on top of that, one of the major things that I had, not really like an issue with, but it was something that I was always kind of curious about, was certainly, over the course of a regular contender season, and I remember thinking this a lot with Korea, especially given in season 2, there was a lot of back and forth that happened, especially with teams like Runaway, teams like Fusion University, who had their kind of somewhat bounce back in season 2 as well, where you see like a lot of back and forth happening in the regular season. And over the course of the season, it would be nice to be able to say, they beat them in week 2, but here it is week 6 and they've developed. I wonder how they would play against that same week 2 opponent. Would it be the same result? And that was a big feature, I think, of those contender seasons, where it's just like, kind of luck of the draw, where you play a team versus, now versus later. Now, though, given the fact that we have these kind of standalone tournaments that are happening every other week, you definitely get a better look at how these teams are faring over the course of different stages of the meta, because obviously a patch comes out and a meta develops from there on. I mean, we saw GOATS happen on multiple different patches, but there was a time where GOATS was being developed, where that patch where GOATS was incredibly strong, nobody was playing GOATS. They were playing something uniquely different. It was very, very, different to what was basically going to be the meta for a long time. So I definitely like that they're doing this. I like the format. I think it also offers up a lot more in terms of following narratives, which people may not really recognize as just a viewer, but as someone in broadcasting, and obviously you as well, we look at this as an opportunity to say, wow, we can do a lot more with this.
Yep. Oh, and the best part, and I think one of the things that you really touched on about the table format that we had, the league format for contenders, was you only got 1 week against this team, right? And like you said, if that Yeah, if that team was in a more friendly meta and you met them in week 1, well, screw you, right? Because you might be a better team in week 7, but you lost. There's no kind of like equalizer because, in college sports, especially college basketball, you play your conference opponents 2 times each, right? And then potentially a third time in the playoffs. But what this is going to do is you're going to be able to see potentially Atlanta Academy and MV play each other, right? There was no cross regional play last time. And so we're going to be able to see those 2 teams play each other potentially week after week. I'm really excited to see Second Wind and Sky Foxes develop a rivalry between themselves, right? Because what that's going to do is create the narrative of, okay, this is the line, right? Atlanta Academy was that line last year for North America, right? They were just so much better than everywhere else. All right, let's see where this, tier 2.5, tier 3 really lies. Let's see who the cream of the crop is there. And I think making it much easier to kind of see the hierarchy is going to be better for players to get placed into teams that are going to be better for them and potentially make it into the upper leagues, because you might not be on Atlanta Academy, but the way that this goes, you could still play them in the quarterfinals because it's all about those tournaments, right?
Yeah, and I think this also allows teams to have more. I mean, I definitely feel for the teams that are going to be at the bottom end of contenders, because they're looking at this through a lens that's very much different than our own.
Yeah, they're going to be playing a lot of games.
Yeah, they're going to be playing a lot more games because they're going to have to fight their way through trials, and they're going to be back and forth, and it's going to be a lot more taxing on them as a team. But while that may be a negative for those teams, it certainly gives us an opportunity as broadcasters and as viewers, as spectators, to be able to say, okay, we really do have a lot of looks on this team. Maybe we can kind of see where they're the cons of the team may fall into place, and maybe where they're lacking, and we can kind of create a storyline based around that. Obviously, negative storylines are not something that we really focus on, but to be able to say, okay, we've been able to see this team time and time again against some of the same opponents, and we've been able to see where their pitfalls may be, well, that gives them more opportunity, I think, to be able to say, okay, we maybe need to make some changes, and they can make more changes throughout the season, where you might see a team. And we saw this a lot of times in contenders in all regions, where a team sticks through because they think, oh, we can develop. But now, given that there's a lot more tournaments happening just in isolation, I think you might see more movement in terms of roster from teams at the bottom end of contenders really trying to work their way out and get away from the trials every single week, kind of, I guess, rut almost, because that would definitely be damaging as a team. But I think you'll find a lot of teams will actually manage to get out of it because of just the constant nature of just always being in competition.
Well, and I think because it's maybe because some of it is off stream, I think scouting might get a little easier for some people too. That when you're a coach, you're going to be able to develop these players a little bit better, because I think being able to play on stream is really, really great, but that's still part of that development, right? Some people are good at it, some people aren't. And I think this whole thing is all about development. And I think at every stage of your path to pro is going to be a little easier to develop here, because if you are one of those bottom tier contenders teams that kind of make it in every single week, that are playing every single time, if you're the star of that team, you're probably going to get promoted at some point, right? You're probably going to be the one on that team that moves up, and all that grind was worth it, right? You just had to kind of slog through playing the most games out of any team, because that's how contenders would. That is the only thing of imbalance that I'm pretty worried about. But I'm really excited, especially we'll talk about the patch in just a second, but just in general, I think Tier 2 Overwatch is already feeling a little bit of a boost with this new format. I think people are really interested in what these storylines are going to be, and we'll see what Tier 2 Overwatch is going to offer in the future. But we do have to move on, and we're going to talk about the patch. It's going to be the PTR patch that was dropped exactly an hour and 42 minutes ago, if you're listening to this live, and I love it. Interesting McCree change, but everything else on there were nerfs to Orisa, to Sigma, to Batiste, and it really seems like they're trying to really be involved in this particular patch and try to change the perception of kind of just sitting back on their laurels and reacting a little bit too slowly. It's been really, really good. So what are your thoughts? Just kind of lay it on us. What are you excited about?
So, I mean, as someone who plays a lot of DPS, just in general, for my own happiness sake, I'm very much, I love this. I approve this. I think most people, if not virtually everyone, is going to approve of these changes. I think the one thing that people are thinking about is that base health change on McCree. That is something that I'm curious to see how that plays out. But It certainly plays into his role as someone who's good against dive. So to have that extra little bit of base health against that initial pressure of, someone like a Doomfist, Genji, Winston, Diva, those kinds of characters, Tracer even, jumping you so that you have that opportunity to react or to be able to support and peel for your teammates. I think that does put him more directly into that role. I just am curious whether or not that puts him a little bit too heavily into other roles as well, just because of the nature of that base health being so strong. But overall, I mean, I think the biggest change here is going to be the grav flux change for Sigma. Being able to cancel that ult is absolutely insane. That completely changes the way that character is going to be played. Now you have to possibly even protect that hero if you're even still playing that hero. I think a lot of teams are going to actually kind of stray away from him. More so than they already have been. Again, that Rhine composition has already been played quite a bit as of late, so I think you're just going to see Sigma falling off quite a bit. Certainly could be played, but going to have to change the way that you're utilizing that ultimate cooldown. And the other thing that has really stood out to me is the nature of the slows. Have all gotten reduced. As someone that gets yoinked quite a bit by Orissas and the slow that happens after grav flux, those slows are awful. Yeah. They feel so difficult to play against, and it's probably the worst part about halt, in my opinion, other than the frequency of the halt. So to see them recognizing that and then adapting those abilities to have a lesser snare duration on them is I love it. It's probably my favorite change of the entire patch note is those two things getting their slow duration reduced.
Yeah, and just to show like how hard of a nerf they're trying to make this for Orisa, it's not just Orisa that they're nerfing in this, right? They're technically nerfing Halt Hook, right? They're also nerfing, Batiste Window with Fire Strike and Halt, right? Those are all kind of combos with Halt that you could pull off way easily, especially at things.
Those things happen instantly. That's not what I'm worried about. What
I'm trying to say is it's going to be more difficult, right, to pull those off, especially if you're platinum below, right? When you're above, you're probably
closes,
not. Yeah, exactly. And so you're going to have to be spot on. You're going to have to be perfect when it comes to these kind of combos in order to successfully pull them off to the, when you're min-maxing, right? The other thing that in terms of characters that don't really appear on these notes but are being affected, when you see McCree, I think the first thing you think about is Pharah. And now that McCree has 250 HP, what does this mean for Pharah, right? Because that's 3 directs, right? If he's not being pocketed by a Mercy, right? Yeah. What does this mean for characters? Because I know, and the reason why I bring it up is Pharah is such a fan favorite, right? We love seeing her most of the time. Rocket Barrage is one of the most fun ultimates to cast and look for and see, how it's going to be game changing. Are we going to see less of it? Because Pharah always seems to find a way, is kind of what I feel.
Yeah, I definitely think that Pharah, it's going to be tough to call actually at this point, because definitely that base health increase is enough to be a concern for Pharah players. Certainly, if you are pocketed by a Pharah, you are going to be able to have the damage to still two-shot McCree. My worry, though, is that as a character that is being built upon a concept of anti-dive, you would assume that you're going to be getting maybe something. I mean, in the past, an anti-dive composition has typically been Anna Brig. That has been, over the last, I would say probably year or so, the go-to support composition for anti-dive. If you incorporate a McCree into this and you really do that kind of protect the McCree or super McCree, whatever you want to call it, that used to happen in days past.
Cushion the Cowboy was always my favorite.
Guess what? Now you have a McCree that's sitting there with 250 base health plus rally armor or just armor pack armor, pocketed by a potential nano boost for extra damage reduction. And, if you take away maybe one of those pieces, you still have pocket from Mercy. You have a super soldier that literally cannot be taken down by any Pharahs, and you will probably straight one-shot the Pharah unless she's way high up in the skybox or very far away. So I would be worried if I'm a Pharah player. This certainly doesn't bode well for you. But overall, I think that you're right. I think that Pharah players will inevitably find a way. It's just going to be far more difficult given these bonuses to McCree against compositions that are inherently solid with Pharah, like Dive.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued to see, because again, I think Pharah players have always found, even when there's McCrees on the other side, especially on control maps, right? You think of Lijiang Tower, you think of Gardens, right? When you think of Oasis and City Center, right? You think of Pharah, and they're probably going to be able to play, but the way that you play Pharah is different when there's a McCree on the field and when there's not, right? And the same thing when it comes to Mercy. And so yeah, so like, is this a nerf to Mercy as well? That's one of like the coolest things about patches, right? And when it comes to game design, it's not just what you read, right? You're not just reading, okay, Hanzo's damage is getting reduced 70 to 60. You know, sometimes you don't think that next step, oh, that's per arrow over those 4 to 5 arrows. That's a ton of damage, right? That's a kill potentially that you're missing because of 10 damage. Or, oh, because McCree's going to be tankier, who are the other DPS that are 250? May and Reaper, right? And you think about how hard it is to kill those characters already. You add McCree to the mix plus long distance damage when these other two are, you know, mid-range characters, and how that's going to interact with everything. I'm really interested to see how things kind of move on, because this is going to be a patch that they want to change things, right? They wouldn't have changed McCree this way if I think they didn't want him to be played. They wouldn't have changed Orisa and Sigma if they thought that they were in a good spot to be removed anyway. They want the meta to change, and this is how they're doing it, and I'm glad to see it. Do you agree?
Yeah, I completely agree. And since we were talking about contenders, I will put in as well that I think there is one team that stands out as this helping more than probably any other, and that is Sky Foxes. Because of the fact that, I mean, I had some stats on them, and the stats that I had from Breaking Barriers and both Breaking Barriers really, and the Mayhem Winter Classic, the main thing that gave them trouble, especially on Eichenwald, was Pharah compositions. They did not stack up well. Their fight win rate with Pharah was something like 34% or something like that.
Ooh.
Low.
Yeah, super low.
And their other fight win rate for their main composition, which was the Mei Hanzo based composition, was something like 71%, which is a very drastic change. And just for context, through season 1 of stage 1 through 3, when NYXL was at their peak, right? They were going to every stage final. They were like dominating every single bracket. At their peak, their fight win rate was something around 56-57%. So again, Sky Foxes being at 70% win rate with the composition that they're playing more often than anything else is insane. But the main thing that hurt them was the fact that they would be playing McCree and Tefera because their Pharah-based matchups were not that successful. And now they can play that to a much... this is going to be a lot better for them. And
it's not only going to be them that gets affected by it. When you kind of equate those percentages to times, right? When you think about, okay, so 3 fights is about like a minute and a half, would you say, in a game, depending on which map you are? Would that be I feel like that's
it
the
really
quicker
depends
side.
on the map. I mean,
yeah.
If you were to... Well.
Yeah, so when you think of, oh, they're winning 70% of these fights, well, they're winning them much quicker, too, in that situation, and they're going to be able to bank more time. If you're losing 2 out of 3 fights every minute and a half, you're losing a minute every fight, right? And that's going to really build upon each other in terms of some troubles that you're going to have. So these kinds of changes definitely going to be changing things, and the real Pharah players are going to be coming out to play because they're going to have something to prove. But really quickly, we got to talk about Overwatch League. It's starting so very soon. Power ranking season has already come out, and we have kind of like an aggregate, I think is the correct word, of everyone's power rankings that someone from the Game House decided were important. And so San Francisco Shock unanimous #1, but basically, just quickly, who's your dark horse? Is there anyone overrated? And do you have any crazy predictions?
I definitely feel like I would put, well, I think the main thing is that I would probably put personally just a slight bit higher than most people. There was one thing that stood out to me with Washington Justice at 11th, was that very consistently people thought that they were going to be kind of middle of the pack, but there were a couple of individuals who put them at 17th and 20th, which I thought was very interesting. Obviously, there's a lot to be said about how they're going to do across a new meta. They were only really good in one stage. A lot can be said about that. But as someone who lives near DC, I want to root for the DC team. Let me do it, okay? And then beyond that, I'm always going to be a person that does see a lot in Rain. I have a lot of trust in their staff as well, and I think that Rain can do well. A lot of people right now have them around the top 5. I think that's very fitting. Personally, I would put them just a slight bit higher. I would put them very much kind of like at that second place spot. Don't hate me. Don't at me. Actually, at me. Just at
do it. At him.
At me.
Yeah, he needs the followers.
True.
As do I. Continue.
But yeah, I personally whether it be through bias or whatever, I would like to see justice a slight bit higher, maybe a few positions. But overall, I think a lot of this, I guess the aggregate here is fair. I definitely think that Shock being in that first place slot doesn't surprise anybody. Maybe a little bit of the other teams that kind of stand out, certainly Dragons, especially given what we saw at that Chinese land that happened. They really stood out. I'm happy to see people did take notice of that. So to see them in fourth definitely is fitting. I think I had Fusion a little bit lower, and I think I had Dragons a little bit higher personally. And
the Fusion seemed to be the team that most people are having a hard time kind of locking
They're
down.
a tough team.
Yeah, because they could be the best team. You don't know yet, right? We got to see them on the field, but at the same time, they've been underperforming for so long. I'm a huge Fusion fan, so I've got opinions, right? I got a lot of swag, and I need to be able to wear it proudly one more time this season. But I don't want to cut you off. But who do you think? Well, we don't have to say who's going to win Overwatch League. Who's going to win Stage 1?
Who's going to win Stage 1? Let's see. We're going to be going into a meta where there's probably going to be, there could be some ball. There could be some Rhine-based compositions as well for Brawl. You know what? I'm just going to take the safe bet. I really do think that Shock has such a good chance, and I don't think that should surprise anybody because they should be good at both of those metas. I think that if you do have any worry about Shock, all I have to do is put Super in front of you, and you should be able to say, you know what, I think it might be okay.
All right. Well, I like that too. And I think what that kind of brings up is we don't know how good the Shock are going to be. You see it's the only unanimous thing on there is number 1. And, Connecticut Heurix, a very famous school in Connecticut is UConn. And the women's basketball team there has won 88 games in a row. I think that's the record for NCAA. And women's basketball has actually had a little bit of a tough time because they're so top heavy. And I don't want you to answer this, but I kind of just want everyone to think about, is it good to have a dominant team like that throughout a couple seasons, right? Does that become boring? We shall see in Stage 2 or 3, but I think it's good to talk about. We're going to go ahead and skip passions outside of Overwatch because I know for a fact you don't have any. And so we're going to go ahead and go right into the interview because there are a couple things that I've been rearing to ask you because we met kind of a little bit more recently. We hung out a lot at BlizzCon last time, so I would say we really started talking to each other over the last couple months, and I don't really know anything about your origin story. The fact that you have a mom and dad for some reason boggles my mind.
I don't.
Oh, okay. Cool. But where did this all start? More so where'd your love of gaming come into? What were some of the first games that you played? And who was kind of your first big gaming influence?
You know what? This is just going to sound like I'm just a big Blizzard shill because my first big game that I got into was Warcraft 3. Got really into the custom games for that game. Then went from there into Diablo 2, especially Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction, the expansion that everybody loved. And we won't talk about Diablo 3, but Diablo 2 was amazing. Spent thousands of hours on that game. But eventually I found myself not playing a Blizzard game and got into Guild Wars 2. That's where I got my start in esports. I don't even really know what the word is. I guess I kind of owned a team in that game, I guess. Basically, I had a brand that a team wanted to come under, and they basically came in. They wound up being the best team in North America. There's a tournament that came out. They said, hey, we need a caster. You happen to live right next to us. Do you want to come out and cast it? And bango, bango, bongo. 6 months later, I'm working at ESL in Burbank, California at their NA studios, working on ESL Pro League for North America and kind of the global series there as well. Unfortunately, some things do die out over time. Guild Wars 2 esports wound up being one of those things. And it just so happened that the timing was perfect. Overwatch came out in 2016, jumped on board with that, and I've been casting Overwatch ever since. Started with my caster from my previous game, Guild Wars 2. Eventually, he decided he was not into the whole casting thing as much anymore. And again, luck struck, and I met Lemon Kiwi through a good friend of mine, and actually a good friend of all of ours at this point, Mushu Beef, introduced us, and we kind of just hit it off immediately. And yeah, we've been kind of working together ever since, and it's been really good.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. One very interesting origin story is I feel like Diablo is was one of those gateway games for a lot of people, right? It was kind of like one of the first hardcore games, I think, that brought in a lot of people that maybe you were like, okay, maybe I can play these other games, right? And I loved it. I didn't really play a lot of Diablo, which is really interesting, but I love like the thematics and the kind of story-driven aspect that Blizzard did so well, especially in Diablo 2. I mean, like I went and watched all the cinematics myself, right, instead of playing the game because I don't have the attention span to horribly like that.
I went back like a month ago and replayed, like I did a full replay of Diablo 2.
Like that's right. Like, you made us watch you.
You were forced to watch. You were forced to watch.
100%. All right. Speaking of forcing to work with someone, I know that you and Lemon are just kidding. You and Lemon are such like a really, really great pair. Something that I love about you guys is your kind of interaction with each other. It's obvious that you guys are friends. Something about my casting partner, Ham, that's something that people bring up with us is like, hey, I love watching games with you guys because it's obvious that you guys are having fun. I would say that your relationship is quasi-abusive in a good way. What's kind of like how, if you were to describe Lemon in like 3 words and how she's affected your life the most, what would those 3 words be?
How she's affected me, or how I would describe her?
How she's affected you.
How she's affected me. Well, I mean, like, if I was just describing her in general, it would definitely be like sister I hate. But then you'd have to add 2 of like, but kind of like also, like you still got that familial love and you do have to respect them. But like, that's kind of been our relationship, I would say, and I think a lot of people can attest to that. I mean, we have really become good friends over the last year and a half or so, however long it's been at this stage, that we've known each other. I think we've definitely gotten really close, and it's been really nice to have someone that you work with on such a frequent basis that you genuinely really do like hanging out with and talking with and working with, because even aside from the casts that we do, we're constantly, working together to try to build each other up and make sure that we're focusing on how can we improve. We do VOD reviews, all that kind of stuff. But then even beyond that, we also just hang out. So that's been really, really cool to have. And I don't think that anything will ever change that about us. I think we'll always be friends no matter what. Because and then beyond that, I think that when you really do work with someone, and I think that people see this with people like Monty and Doa and everything, it's something that will always last, and I think that's something that we have as well. But again, we do definitely rip into each other for sure.
Well, something about the esports space that is one of the hardest parts about working in it is how chaotic it is, right? You've been doing it for a couple years. The 2 of us, I would say, are part of like the 2nd or 3rd generation of people who are trying to come in here. We're not Tasteosis, right? We're not Frodan, but we're, we came into, it was still burgeoning. It's kind of like cell phones, right? Millennials came into the internet a little bit later, and so a lot of things have changed. So how do you handle that, right? Are you doing other work, and how do you handle all of that change? Because when it comes to change, negativity comes with that as well. So how do you maintain health?
I think the biggest thing is just really just kind of focusing on your own mental health personally. I think that one of the biggest things that helped me was I asked Uber actually one time. I was like, what is the number one thing that you would recommend to someone coming up? And I'll give this out to anybody that's listening as well that's interested. What is the number one thing that you can recommend to a caster coming up to really kind of focus on outside of just the casting stuff? And he said, clear your head, have something that you are passionate about as well, just a hobby, something to do outside of this, so that you can really kind of just find a nice little stable baseline, something to really dig into, whether it be just, exercising or, finding something, going on, traveling, if you have obviously the funds to do that or the means to do so, just find something that you can have happiness in as well, alongside this passion that you have of casting in esport, specifically Overwatch. That's definitely helped me just kind of really just keep me in a good headspace. And then beyond that, really just focusing on the fact that if you work hard, if you're doing what you're supposed to do, eventually good things will come your way. And I think so far, for a lot of people, that has really worked out, and I really hold on to that, and I think that has stabilized me in a lot of ways as well.
Cool. Well, do you have, it's like the last question before we end this interview. Do you have any regrets that you would like to share, kind of like those words of wisdom? I went through it, so you don't have to.
Regrets. I would say I certainly have a lot of regret tweets. So make sure that when you click that send button, you're knowing what you're actually clicking send on. But overall, just kind of more a general aspect, I don't necessarily think I have too many, if any, regrets at all. I mean, I have come a long way, especially since 2018 or so, where I really started to dig into everything. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm very happy for, I guess, what could be ahead, I guess. I don't know.
Awesome. One of my biggest regrets is knowing you. So last question. Everything I ask this to everyone on the show. Overwatch is something special for us. It's why we're together here on this show. It's why everyone in the Twitch chats here, right? It can really bring people together. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm involved in Overwatch specifically. What about you? Why Overwatch?
Honestly, I guess from a less emotional perspective, it definitely appeals to me as a person. I'm very much kind of macro oriented. I definitely like a lot of the micro elements of just being able to, aim and, understand your character's abilities. I think that's all fascinating. But then also having a game that involves a lot of elements from things like MOBAs was certainly talked about. I think a little bit less so now, but certainly those macro strategies of positioning, understanding how to use a lot of your cooldowns together and all these different synergies. That is something that I find very interesting in. But then beyond that, I've also grown to love this community. I think anybody that has been in this community for any extent of time can certainly say very similar. There's a lot of great people in this community. A lot of them have already been mentioned tonight as well. I mean, the people that I surround myself with, I genuinely adore. I love them so very much. And I think that honestly, without them, I know this is very cliche, but without them, I don't think, myself, and I'm sure you feel similarly, that we would not be doing this for as long as we have.
Exactly, 100%. Well, Heurix, thank you so much for coming on to Overwatch Lately today. It was an absolute pleasure having you on. You are both the most wrinkle and smooth-brained person I know. Somehow you're able to occupy. I don't know how you're able to occupy both of those spaces so well. 1 second you're blowing my mind with your smartness, and the next I literally want to punch you in the face. But that's why I love you, Heurix. And thank you so much for coming on. I cannot wait to have you on again. That was wonderful. But where can we find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. You wouldn't have to do too much digging. It's just CT Heurix on Twitter. That's probably the main place to find me. I would say I pretty much push everything through Twitter. So I would say that's a good central point to find anything that I'm doing is right there on Twitter, CT Heurix.
All right. Well, we're going to see you do some more Tier 2 tournaments as well. I know your dream's probably going into the Overwatch League, and we're all telling you you're going to do it. I think that when that wrinkle brain shows, it shows bright. And so that's going to be it for us today on Overwatch Lately, where we talk about what's been happening in Overwatch lately. I've been Chris Boopasaurus. Sorry, you can catch me at Boopasaurus Rex on Twitter. You can also find this on YouTube a little bit later if you're catching the tail end and you want to see what Heurix and I talked about at the beginning. But for now, that's going to be it. And we're going to see you next week for Overwatch Lately. We'll see you later.